There is a particular kind of precision that accountants carry. It is the precision of someone who has been trained to believe that every number has a correct value, every transaction a proper record, every ledger a truth that can be verified. Accountants do not accept assertions. They require evidence. They follow the trail. They find the discrepancy. Grace Adeyemi had been an accountant for 19 years when she was convicted of embezzling $400,000 from the mid-sized property development company where she had been financial controller for 7 years. She was 44 years old. She had built her career on the precise and faithful stewardship of other people's money. She had not taken the money. She knew who had. She knew because the same precision that had made her an excellent accountant made her an excellent investigator. And from her cell in a New Zealand women's prison, with limited access to documents and no access to the company's financial systems, she spent 2 years assembling the case that proved it. The man who had embezzled the money and then engineered Grace's conviction to redirect the investigation was the managing director she had reported to. He had taken not $400,000 but $900,000 over 5 years. He had done it carefully, systematically, and in ways that were designed to be attributed to Grace when they were eventually discovered. They were eventually discovered by Grace from prison, using prison library resources, freedom of information requests, and the 19 years of professional knowledge she carried in her head. This is the story of an accountant who audited her own wrongful conviction and found the fraud underneath it. Grace Adeyemi had come to New Zealand from Nigeria at the age of 27, following a husband who had been offered a research position at the University of Auckland. The marriage had lasted 4 years. Grace had lasted in New Zealand, had found in Wellington a city that suited her, a profession that she was very good at, and a community that she had built over 17 years of ordinary committed daily life. She had qualified as a chartered accountant in New Zealand in 2003, had worked for 2 mid-sized accounting firms before moving in-house to Harbour Rise Property Developments in 2011. Harbour Rise was a Wellington-based company that developed residential and commercial properties across the North Island. It was owned and managed by a man named Craig Saunders, who had founded it in 2004 and who had, by the time Grace joined, built it into a company with an annual turnover of $12 million. Grace's role as financial controller placed her at the center of all of the company's financial activity: accounts payable and receivable, payroll, project budgeting, bank reconciliations, and the management of the company's relationship with its external auditors. She knew the company's finances with the intimacy of someone who had built the financial systems from the ground up when she arrived. She was by every professional assessment exceptional. Her external auditor described her in a later statement as the most thorough financial controller he had worked with in 30 years. Her files were complete. Her reconciliations were clean. Her management of the company's cash flow had saved it from serious difficulty in 2014 when 2 property developments had run over budget simultaneously. In early 2017, Grace noticed something. A series of payments to a consultancy firm, Meridian Advisory Services, had been authorized by Craig Saunders over the previous 18 months. The payments totaled approximately $200,000. Grace had not been aware of the consultancy engagement. When she requested the contracts, Craig told her they were commercially sensitive and handled directly by him. When she noted that the payments needed to be properly documented for the audit, Craig said he would handle it. He handled it. He handled it by beginning the process that would end with Grace's conviction. Craig Saunders had been embezzling from Harbour Rise Property Developments since 2012. He had created a series of shell companies. Meridian Advisory Services was one of 4, to which he had been routing payments for fictitious consultancy services. The total, by 2017, was approaching $900,000. When Grace began asking questions about the Meridian payments, Craig recognized that his position was becoming precarious. He had, over 5 years, become skilled at financial concealment. He now applied those skills to a different problem: the creation of evidence that would attribute the company's missing funds to Grace. Over the following 8 months, Craig made a series of carefully constructed moves. He created a set of internal transfer records, backdated, digitally manufactured, that appeared to show Grace had been routing small amounts regularly to a personal account held in a variation of her name. The amounts were small enough to have evaded detection in any given month. Cumulatively, they added to approximately $400,000 over 6 years. The account holding the money was a real account. Craig had opened it, in a name sufficiently close to Grace's to imply her, but not identical enough to be an obvious forgery, using identity documents he had access to through the company's HR files. He then reported the discrepancy to the company's external auditors, presenting his fabricated internal records as evidence of a fraud he had just discovered. He expressed distress. He said he had trusted Grace completely, and could not understand how this had happened. The external auditors escalated to the Serious Fraud Office. The SFO investigated for 6 months. They found the fabricated transfer records. They found the account in the near version of Grace's name. They found the accumulated balance. They could not immediately find evidence that the records were fabricated because Craig's digital manufacturing had been careful and because the forensic digital examination of the records was not conducted at the level of depth that would have revealed the metadata anomalies that proved they had been created after the fact. Grace was arrested in March 2018. She said immediately, "I did not do this. I have been asking Craig about undocumented payments for a year. Look at Meridian Advisory Services." The SFO noted her claim. They investigated Meridian Advisory Services and found what Craig had intended them to find: a legitimately constituted company with properly formatted invoices and plausible documentation. The documentation was sophisticated. The SFO did not find the shell company structure beneath it. Grace was charged with embezzlement of $400,000. The trial of Grace Adeyemi opened in Wellington in October 2018. It lasted 4 weeks. The prosecution's case rested on the fabricated transfer records, the account in the near version of Grace's name, and the accumulated balance. They presented Craig Saunders as the managing director who had been betrayed by a trusted employee, a role he performed with the conviction of someone who had been planning it for 8 months. The defense challenged the records. They engaged a forensic digital accountant who testified that certain metadata in the transfer records was anomalous, that the creation timestamps did not match the purported transaction dates. The prosecution countered with their own digital expert who acknowledged the anomalies, but characterized them as consistent with normal system updates and data migrations rather than fabrication. 2 experts, one finding the same anomaly and reaching opposite conclusions. Grace testified. She was in the witness box, exactly what a 19-year career in accounting produces: precise, methodical, and utterly unable to be vague about numbers. She walked through every element of her financial management. She showed that the amounts alleged to have been taken over 6 years would have required a systematic manipulation of accounts that she would have detected in her own audit procedures. She showed the specific controls she had in place. She said, "This could not have happened without my detection of it." The prosecution's response was that Grace's detection protocols were her own, and that a fraudster designing her own controls could design them to conceal her own fraud. She also raised Meridian Advisory Services again. Directly, she said to the jury, "There are $900,000 missing from this company. I have found $400,000 attributed to me. I am asking you to look for the other $500,000. It is in the Meridian structure." The jury deliberated for 6 days. They found Grace guilty on 4 counts of embezzlement. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison. She was 44 years old. Craig Saunders sat in the gallery and watched. He had attended every day of the trial. Grace Adeyemi entered Arahata Prison in Tawa, Wellington in November 2018. She was 44 years old. She had 19 years of financial expertise and, in the prison library, access to the company's register, the government's official database of registered companies, and the ability to file Freedom of Information requests. She began immediately. The question Grace was trying to answer was the one she had raised in her trial testimony. Where was the other $500,000? If Craig had taken $900,000 and she had been convicted of $400,000, the remaining $500,000 was somewhere. And somewhere meant a financial trail. Meridian Advisory Services was a registered New Zealand company. Its directors and shareholders were a matter of public record. Grace had never been able to access the company's register during the trial because her access to the internet had been limited to what her legal team could provide. In prison, she could access the register through the library's public terminal. She looked up Meridian Advisory Services. The registered director was a company called Pacific Holdings Limited. She looked up Pacific Holdings Limited. Its registered director was a company called Coastal Ventures NZ. She looked up Coastal Ventures NZ. Its registered director was a natural person, a name she did not recognize. She wrote the name down. She filed a Freedom of Information request for any public records relating to that name. She wrote to her former external auditor, who believed in her innocence and had agreed to help, asking him to examine the Meridian invoicing structure for the kind of anomalies that a sophisticated shell company would show. She wrote to 3 forensic accounting academics at New Zealand universities, explaining her situation and asking whether any of them would review the metadata anomalies in the fabricated transfer records. 2 did not respond. 1. Dr. Marcus Webb at Victoria University of Wellington wrote back. He said he was interested. He said the metadata question was exactly the kind of problem he had been developing new analytical tools for. He said he would look at it. The analysis took 5 months. Dr. Webb's tools, significantly more sophisticated than those used by either expert at Grace's trial, found something definitive. The transfer records contained a hidden timestamp layer that showed they had been created in a single session in August 2017. Not over 6 years, as the records purported. In one session. In August 2017. 8 months before Grace's arrest. That was the smoking gun. But Grace had found something else first. The person listed as director of Coastal Ventures NZ, Craig Saunders' shell company's shell company, was Craig Saunders' brother-in-law. Grace's solicitor submitted Dr. Webb's metadata analysis and the corporate ownership chain to the Serious Fraud Office in June 2020. The SFO had, by this point, a new team on the case. The original investigators had moved on. The new team reviewed the submission. They were, to their credit, thorough. They engaged their own digital forensics team to verify Dr. Webb's findings. The verification confirmed the metadata anomaly. The records had been created in August 2017. They were fabricated. The SFO then examined the corporate structure Grace had mapped from the company's register. They found Craig Saunders' brother-in-law. They found the bank accounts. They found, with the tools and legal powers available to the SFO that had not been available to Grace, the movement of funds through the shell structure over 5 years. They found $923,000. Craig Saunders was arrested at his home in Kandala, Wellington on a Tuesday morning in September 2020. He was 61 years old. He had been running Harbour Rise Property Developments, which had continued to operate after Grace's conviction, under his sole financial management, for the 18 months since Grace had been imprisoned. When the SFO officers arrived, Craig was at his kitchen table having breakfast. His expression, the arresting officer said later, was not surprise. It was the expression of someone who has been waiting for a long time for a specific thing to arrive, and who, when it finally does, feels something closer to relief than fear. He made no comment. He requested a lawyer. The lawyer arrived. Craig Saunders pleaded guilty within 3 months to $923,000 of fraud and to the deliberate fabrication of evidence that had sent Grace Adeyemi to prison. Grace's conviction was referred to the Court of Appeal by the SFO itself, an unusual step that reflected the seriousness of Craig's fabrication and the SFO's acknowledgement of its own investigation's failure. The conviction was quashed in December 2020. Grace had served 2 years and 1 month. Grace Adeyemi walked out of Arahata prison on December 19, 2020. Her daughter Yemi, 23 years old, who had been 19 when Grace was convicted, was there. Her sister from Auckland, Dr. Webb, who had driven down from Wellington, was there. Grace looked at Dr. Webb and said, "The metadata." He said, "The hidden timestamp layer." She said, "August 2017. He said, "1 session." It was, by every account, the most specific expression of gratitude anyone in the car park had ever witnessed. They went to a restaurant in Wellington that evening, Grace's choice. She ordered carefully and ate slowly, and held the menu for a long time before she ordered, the way someone holds a thing they have not been permitted to hold for 2 years. She ordered the fish. She ate it all. Craig Saunders was sentenced in February 2021 to 6 years in prison. He served 3 years and 4 months. Grace Adeyemi received compensation from the New Zealand government, assessed for 2 years of wrongful imprisonment and the destruction of her career trajectory. She also received a civil settlement from Craig Saunders' personal assets, which were considerable despite the fraud, and from the Harbour Rise Company's remaining assets. The SFO issued a formal acknowledgement that its original investigation had been misled by sophisticated fabricated evidence and committed to enhanced digital forensic standards for future fraud cases. Grace Adeyemi is 50 years old. She lives in Wellington. She returned to accounting work in 2022, not as a financial controller, not yet, because the professional reinstatement process, after a quashed conviction, takes longer than the legal process and requires more patience than any person should need to find. But she is working. She is auditing. She is doing what she has always done. She has been asked in several interviews what it was like to build the fraud case from inside a prison cell, without software, without access to the company's systems, with only the company's register, the Freedom of Information process, and 19 years of professional knowledge held in her head. She says, "It was what I knew how to do. The tools were worse. The conditions were worse. The stakes were different, they were my stakes. But the work was the same. You look for what doesn't fit. You follow the trail. You document what you find." She says, "The thing that helped most was not my technical skills. It was the habit of not accepting assertions. Accountants are trained not to accept what they are told, to ask for the evidence, to verify. I had been told I was guilty. I did not accept that. I asked for the evidence. I verified." She says, "The evidence said I was not guilty. The evidence was always there. Craig had hidden it well, but not perfectly. Nothing is perfect." She pauses. She says, "What I am proud of is not finding Craig's fraud. I am proud of the habit of mind that made finding it possible. The refusal to accept what I was told. The insistence on following the trail wherever it went. That habit saved me. I have had it for 20 years. I will have it for the rest of my life." She says, "Craig is out now. He served 3 years and 4 months. I served 2 years and 1 month. The mathematics of that does not work out to justice. But the mathematics never works out exactly. What works out, if you are fortunate, is the truth. And the truth worked out." She goes back to work. The ledger is open. The numbers are waiting. She follows the trail. She always follows the trail.